Alright, Shalom, Shalom. This is Brother Mayum coming at you from GMS Tampa Bay. First and foremost, I want to give all the praise and all the glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Rakah HaKodash. Double honors to the elders, apostles of Great Millstone. And much blessing and salutations to the Akim around the four corners of the earth who are diligently pushing out this truth and sincerity. And just want to do a quick lesson. Just going into, this article I came across here. Going into, some more job losses. And, you're starting to see outside of America, nations, that are allied with America, really the West, are the nations that you're starting to see affected by a lot of these shortages and energy price increases. And, this is, more signs of the times that we're living in. All right. Habakkuk chapter 2 tells you that these things were for an appointed time, and at the end they shall speak and not lie. And we're seeing these end time prophecies take place. All right, and then you have right now the pretty much the entire Western world, catching all types of hell because of the nonsense that America has involved itself and its allies into. Okay. And so you got this article here entitled "The UK job losses hit a 5-year high amid Iran war." It says soaring energy prices and disrupted trade are forcing firms to scale back hiring, according to the British Office for National Statistics. It says UK employers axed 100,000 jobs in April, the steepest monthly drop in 5 years, and the latest sign that a weakening labor market is being dragged down by the prolonged conflict in Iran. All right, and this is what this is the scripture about the grinding season, and because of the grinders are low. And let's get that real quick. Ecclesiastes 12:3. "In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out the windows be darkened, and the doors shall be shut in the streets." And that's what's going to eventually come. As more and people get laid off, people are going to have less money to spend. And what's going to ultimately happen is, especially here in America, where you have a majority of the businesses that stimulate this economy are small businesses. You have, I did, a little research into this, about a month ago or so. Over 90% of companies in America are small businesses. So they make up a large portion of these companies that hire people and that people do business with, whether it be in your downtowns or, your mom and pop shops, in your local town, whether it be a restaurant, a salon, whatever the business may be. More than likely, it's a small business. All right. It's very few companies that are actually, big corporations. And you see how big corporations, they do mass hirings. They have, thousands of employees, where a small business may have, around 10 employees or so, give or take, depending on the type of business that it is. But these small businesses are the main ones being affected, and that's why the majority of these prices are skyrocketing. So as prices skyrocket, people, tend to do less business with, small businesses. Those small businesses are having to let people go. Okay? And ultimately, like I said earlier, those businesses are going to have to end up closing up shop. And you start to see it with hour changes first. A company that'll be open Monday through or Sunday through Saturday, 7 days a week, from 9 o'clock to 7 o'clock, or whatever, 9 to 9. Now they're having to close on weekends, and they're only open on Monday through Fridays. And then surely but surely they start to close up certain days of the week. Okay? And it gets to a point to where eventually they end up closing up shop completely. And, in my local town where I stay at, they have a couple restaurants, actually one in particular, that they're open up pretty much. I think it's like 4 days out of the week. All right, this used to be a place that was popping. It was a local little spot where everyone knew about. People used to go there. It was a lot of the older crowd, a lot of older Edomite crowd. But nonetheless, that you used to drive by the place and it was packed. And now you drive by and it's only a quarter of the parking lot is filled when it's open, and they have certain days that now they're closed. They're now no longer open on Mondays, and I believe they're not open on Tuesdays either. Okay, but these things that America has caused and that are they're doing on the earth has caused a lot of these different nations as well to be to be hurt by their actions. Okay, and this isn't something that's only going to come to America, as we clearly see. This is something that's happening all over the earth, primarily to the Western nations, and to be specific with the UK. This is Jeremiah 50:12. It says, "Your mother shall be sore confounded; she that bare ye shall be ashamed. Behold, the hindermost of the nations shall be a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert." Now, the United States gave birth to America. Okay, and here it is. Because of the actions of America, you have nations like the UK that are catching hell as well, and they're not even really involved in this Iran war. I believe they had some talks of housing some U.S. planes and particular bases, but for the most part, they were hands off with this whole Iran ordeal. But as you can see, they're being clearly affected, man. And ultimately, we know where this is leading to, man. And let's just get this real quick. Revelations chapter 17, verse 16. "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire." And see, this is what's going to ultimately come to fruition, man. And we already starting to see, for the last, I'd say, 5 years, we've really gotten a clear picture and a clear indication of why these different nations, specifically the allies of America, all right, the NATO EU nations, we've gotten a clear picture as to why these nations are going to hate America. All right? Especially with this Iran war, you've had nations like Spain, Italy, okay, and several other nations that have, openly come out and said that, we don't want nothing to do with you. We're done doing business. I believe even Canada was one of these nations that, for a time there was going back and forth with America. Obviously they folded under pressure, but it's going to get to a point to where there ain't going to be no more giving in. These nations are going to have had enough, and we're pretty much at that point to where these nations have had enough, and they're going to turn their backs on America, and this place, Babylon the Great, aka America, is going to be left to itself. All right, and that's one of the things that Donald Trump has been, harping on the last few years, is how these NATO EU nations don't really contribute nothing. That America is the only one that contributes, and they're not really getting a fair share of the deal. The other nations aren't really contributing as America is contributing. So now you're getting ready to get what you want. All right, you've cried wolf about how these nations ain't do nothing for you. Well, we're coming into a time period where these nations are really not going to do nothing for you, and it's going to be in a time where you most need their help. Because what America has done effectively is made enemies of everyone in the world, and except for the small hatters, and it is going to be needful for this place to need allies, but they're not going to have them. America's own allies are going to, as we just read, burn her with fire. How do you think that's going to happen? How do you think a country can be destroyed by fire? Okay? How can a nation be made desolate? Okay? In today's times. Because it's been proven that sanctions don't work. You can't make a nation desolate with sanctions, because look at Russia. They've been able to bounce back even during sanctions, man. where those sanctions were meant to hurt their economy and hurt their country ultimately, and all they did was flourish and come out with their own form of currency, of doing trade with other nations that were willing to do trade. Okay. So the only real way that you're gonna make a nation desolate in today's times is through missiles, man. And we clearly see how that's effective with what's going on in the Middle East right now, man, where you have complete cities that are utterly laid waste. All right, look at what's happening with the small hats in Gaza over there, man, where you have whole cities that once were filled with with buildings laid completely flat, man, completely evacuated of people. And ultimately, what's going to come to pass, because those are little missiles, is going to be a thermonuclear missile that's going to go, and it's going to be multiple missiles, as it talks about in Revelation chapter 9, and it's going to lay waste completely to America. There ain't going to be rubble. There's not going to be trees, half broken down. There's not going to be houses that are you see part of a house. No, there ain't going to be nothing left in America. Okay? This place is going to be utterly and completely destroyed. And this is all prophecy, man. This is written in the scriptures. Again, indicating to you what's going to be taking place in the last days. And we see how things are being set up. It's clear as day. All right? We're looking at things happening in the earth as if you were looking in a mirror looking at yourself. That's how clearly these things are happening. Okay? But hey, Lord's will, this was edifying. I'm gonna go ahead and close out there. The whole earth is suffering under the rulers that are currently in place, man. And something's got to give, and what's gonna give is this man's rulership. So with that, I want to give all the praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim Yahushai, Bahashim Rakah HaKodash. Double honors to the elders, apostles of Great Millstone, and much blessing and salutations to the Akim on the four corners of the earth, who are diligently pushing out this truth and this truth is